So we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Rohit here. Rohit, you're behind a pretty interesting concept, which is helping leaders, helping businesses, go and determine and see what maybe they're not able to see that's so obvious to them. That would be so obvious to them, helping them go and see that. And I think that it's something that's super important. There's a lot of trends that may be out there that business leaders may be unable to determine and may not be visible to them. And there's mental training that's required for that. And you've got, a bunch of books you've written. Now you've got a new book coming out on this concept. So I'm excited to have you and to get into your story.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. So, how did your interest in wanting to help brands see things that maybe are difficult for them to see and wanting to write about this topic and become so immersed in this space begin?
So I came at this world from working in the world of advertising. I spent many years working at Ogilvy and Leo Burnett, so really big ad agencies. And in those types of roles, my job was to be part of a team that was trying to come up with creative, non-obvious solutions. I mean, I didn't call it that at that time, but we were selling creativity, right? That was the goal. And what I realized was that in order to be able to do that, and in order to think in that way, you had to adopt certain behaviors. And I saw those around me from the most creative people. And that was where my journey towards this kind of started. And when I left the ad agency, almost 10 years ago, I started writing about what I called non obvious thinking. And for years and years, I would produce an annual trend report. So my version of non-obvious thinking was if you can take all these pieces from over here and put them together with this, you could start to anticipate the future. And so I kind of became a futurist. I started talking about the future. And that led me to this new book, which is called Non-Obvious Thinking, which is all about the mindset that it takes to be able to see these things that no one else sees.
Mhm. So you had this background in advertising. What did you find was really most helpful from there to help spot these types of avenues that maybe other people aren't able to see?
One of the beautiful things about working in an agency environment is that you don't typically just work in one industry and you don't work on one client. You're always working on different things. And so, because of that, you start to see these intersections between different companies that a lot of people don't get to see because they're just working for one company in one industry. And I think, benefited from that type of work environment because what it forced me to do is say, well, okay, you're working on microchips with Intel, a total B2B business, and then you're working on like selling toothpaste in the same day. And that variety forces you to kind of switch your brain really quickly, but also starts to see some commonalities because at the end of the day, both of those things are selling to people and people are people. And I think I really took that mindset that was required to succeed in that environment and tried to blow it out for people who aren't necessarily working in an environment like that.
Hmm, interesting. And why do you think that people weren't seeing, these types of things beforehand? Like, why do you think that their minds are not accustomed to that, and they need a book like what you're creating here?
Oh, a lot of reasons. I mean, I think that, and none of it I mean, it's not like you're a bad person, right? I mean, we get really good at doing what we do and we get laser focused on it. And we go to industry conferences for our industry and we can become an expert. And the more expert we become, the more we get rewarded for our expertise. And so the world kind of pushes you in one direction and says, look, if you're really good at this thing, that's what you should be good at. And that's what you should know. And the problem is eventually we all reach a point where we become so focused on that thing that we fail to see opportunities or threats coming from elsewhere. We get distracted by our laser focus. And so I think it's really important for people to stop, take a moment and say, well, there's other interesting things happening outside of my world of reference. And that's professionally, but also personally. I mean, if you think about what's happening in our culture right now, there's a lot of forces that say to you, if someone doesn't agree with you or doesn't see the world the way you see it, they must be stupid. And I think
Mhm.
that's wrong. I think that there are ways of disagreeing with someone, but still respecting the fact that they have their opinion and you have your opinion. And I feel like we're losing that. And part of what I wanted to do is write a book that jumped straight into the middle of that and tried to promote this message that we can disagree. And that doesn't mean that somebody has to be an idiot.
Right. I think that's a good concept, and that you're highlighting it's important for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So you have a role of chief trend curator. What does that really entail? It's definitely an interesting position.
Yeah, it's a like most titles, it's a invented title. But the nice thing about having your own company is nobody says you can't choose your own title to be whatever you want. So it is a made up title. But the reason I chose one specific word in there, curator, is because what I do with trends was very inspired by what curators in like a museum environment, for example, would do, which is if you think about a museum curator, I mean, you know that they exist, but you probably don't think about how difficult their job is to put together an exhibit and to decide not only what to display, but what not to display. And in any exhibit, you have thousands of pieces of art or sculptures or anything that could have gone into the exhibit that someone chose to leave out.
Huh.
And it's the ultimate version of trying to focus because you're trying to tell a story through the exhibit. And if you thought about applying that same discipline to ideas, uh, that's kind of to me what a trend curator does. A trend curator pays attention to what's out there, what the stories are, what's happening in the culture, the movements, and then starts to put those pieces together and says, this is what's really important to pay attention to. And that's what I've tried to do for, more than the last decade in terms of every book that I put out in the Non-Obvious series. And then now with this new book, Non-Obvious Thinking.
hmm And so your 10th book, to my knowledge, the 10th edition of it became like the number one on the Wall Street Journal. Why do you think you had that kind of success with that specific edition?
I think it was a couple of reasons. I mean, one was that I'd really built up a track record. I mean, I did something that anyone in publishing would tell you is insane, which is I took the same book and I did a new version of it every year. And then I put the year on the cover. So, you can imagine how many people are clamoring for Non-Obvious 2017 right now, right? Like you sort of put this expiration date on the front cover of your book, which is, not a smart thing to do if you're thinking about it from a commercial publishing perspective. But for me, what it allowed me to do is say the ideas in this book are new and fresh, and every year there's a new version of it, and you want the latest version. And so because of that, I was able to build up an audience, I think, of people who were like, hey, when's the next one coming out? And it drove a lot of my keynote speaking. It drove a lot of the things in my business. And the last version, the version you're talking about, which came out in 2020, was called Non-Obvious Megatrends.
Mm.
And so first of all, you say megatrends and people are like, oh, tell me what the megatrends are. Like there's already some intrigue there, right? But also the megatrends edition looked back over the past 10 years and it really kind of provided a summary of everything that had come before to the point of having all 150 or so trends that had been predicted over the past 10 years. In the back, there's an appendix with grades for each one of them for whether they actually panned out and took off or didn't. And so there's a lot of transparency in this process too, which I think people really appreciated also.
And how much of the book's really reworked every single year? Like, how do you figure out that balance?
Yeah, so there's two parts to the book. One is the methodology behind it, which really was the same every year. And then the second part was 15 trends specifically. And those 15 were brand new every single year.
And these were just based on observations you had throughout the year, things that you felt like were most important based on what was going on.
Yeah, it's sort of a combination of stories and things that I've read. I also go and speak at probably about 40 events a year. So I'm always out there in different industries talking to people, interviewing people. I have a podcast where I'm interviewing people as well. So it was all these inputs that went into figuring out what these trends would be and trying to spot those macro pictures. So it was a lot of different things.
Makes sense. So there's a lot of different ways that I think people can realize this type of thinking that you want them to have. One of which, of course, is the book that you're mentioning. But there's other ways that you're involved in, which is keynotes. You do impact workshops, summits. What do you think is like most effective for? I mean, I know everybody's different, but what do you think is kind of the most effective recipe to affect somebody like this in this category? And what have you seen has done well that maybe surprised you?
So I guess the first part of that, I'm a big believer in the power of live events, of getting people together in one place, partially because, we're humans. We like to interact with, and we need time away from the work from home environment that we've all kind of become accustomed to. So I do believe in the power of that. But also, I think there's a certain impact as a speaker that I can have when I'm in the same room with someone and I can share some of these ideas from the stage, but then I can connect with them afterwards and have a beer and we can talk about it. So I don't know that there's any more impactful way for me to share this message than doing that, which is why I'm so glad that now we're back to all of these live events, because it was really tough during the pandemic that, we didn't have any of these events. We were all kind of stuck. All of us speakers were trying to do these things on virtual with Zoom and, telepresence, and like it was just not the same. So I'm really excited that those are back. I think that's a high impact way to deliver the message. So I believe in that.
Mhm. And that's just because the exchange, you can really engage the audience very differently. That's why you like it most.
Yeah, I think so. And then the written word or the articles or even videos are great supporting material afterwards.
Mm.
So, once someone sees this and then they go and they read the book, or maybe they read a article that I've written, or they watch a video, or they listen to an episode of the show, like, those are all just reinforcing moments of this methodology.
Mhm. So it's a whole ecosystem basically.
Yeah, I mean, any marketer will tell you it's frequency, right? I mean, you hit them with the message once in person, then you hit them once with with the book, and then they see it somewhere else, and then they see it mentioned in an article somewhere, and it starts to stick.
Mhm.
They start to remember, oh, non-obvious. I can be non-obvious. Like that kind of sticks out for them.
Uh-huh. And just why call it all non-obvious? Like why build it around that branding?
This brand was interesting. It sort of came about because it was a word I just started using, and I found myself using it more and more. So much so that I'm like, well, why don't I just call it non-obvious? And so the first thing I did is I went out and did a search, and there was no book that had that title, so I used that. And also, there was nobody who was really using it in this way, so I trademarked it. So now this is actually a trademarked brand across all of the learning and all of the different things. And over the last 10 years, I've really built it up through not only the books, but also the talks, the podcast. We have a non-obvious book awards program that we host every year, where we honor the best, most interesting books of the year that are published, nonfiction books. So there's a lot of elements to this brand to try and promote that idea that the world needs more non-obvious thinkers. I mean, that's the message.
And it's in so many different categories that you can have non-obvious thinkers. So you're trying to target a lot of different ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, there's a personal motivation here too. I mean, I personally believe that, and I've seen that people who are able to be non obvious thinkers are more successful. They come up with better ideas. They're more indispensable in their jobs. They become better entrepreneurs. They found bigger companies. I mean, all of these benefits that we might want as individuals for our career come from being able to be a non obvious thinker.
Makes sense. So, you have this new book you're writing that you finished writing now. It's with Ben Dupon. Why was he such an ideal partner for you to collaborate on this?
Oh, Ben was great. So, I mean, first of all, we found each other because for the past almost 20 years, he's been hosting a dinner every year that challenges people to bring their biggest, best non obvious idea. And that's what it was
Oh.
called, the non obvious dinner. So, first of all, we were using this brand without knowing of one another for a long time. But then when we first met, it was sort of like this perfect combination because he comes from the world of VCs. So he's looking for big, non obvious, unusual ideas to invest in, right? He's not coming from the world of marketing and advertising where I'm just writing about it. Like I'm looking at it more from a journalist point of view. Like I'm looking for great stories to cover. He's looking at it as an investment opportunity. And so putting those two lenses together allowed us to really come up with this framework because he had so many experiences, not only from himself, but from these dinners and from the things people had come up with. And then the other thing that we loved was that we have a little bit of an age gap. He's a little bit older than I am. We come from different sort of political backgrounds. So we don't tend to vote the same way. So we're very different as individuals. But when we come together to write a book like this, I think it's also got this sort of subtle reminder that, you don't have to agree on anything. You don't have to agree on everything, right? To become collaborators on something like this. And that was us. Like we don't agree on everything, but we agree on enough in terms of the world and what matters to put a book like this together.
So this kind of goes back on the point you had earlier about connecting people and not being so divisive. Like you guys are the example of that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we're trying to be, because I think especially now as we, have a election year and a lot of that's going to be front and center for people. I think we all need a reminder like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely good to see that you guys can work work together and not have any issues like that.
Yeah, and I don't think we're unique, by the way. I think that there's a lot of situations like that. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example, right? Like you might meet somebody or hear about somebody who believes completely the different political, side that you are, and yet you both love the same football team. So they can't be entirely wrong about everything in their lives. They can't be completely wrong because they love the same team you love. Right. So there's something that reminds you that, hey, you know what? They're a human too. Like they have passions and things, and we can agree on something, even though we don't agree on all things.
Mhm. Totally. So if you had to give Rohit like a couple different techniques to be able to realize these non-obvious things, what would you say are some quick techniques that people can implement?
So I love this question because I mean, it's kind of the whole structure of the book. Like the book has got 24 super short chapters, and each one is a tip, right? A lesson for how to do this. So I'll give you, maybe a couple that I think would be really helpful. So one that really stood out to me is I remember reading the story of the guy Dara who took over Uber as the new CEO. And one of the things he did early on, not early enough according to him, but relatively early on, is he went and became a driver and experienced Uber as a driver.
Mhm.
And right after he had that experience, he sent an email to the entire company saying why we suck. That was the title of the email. And it
Wow.
went on to talk about how bad the experience was and all the things they needed to fix. And I think that there's a lesson in there, which has also been demonstrated through reality TV shows, right? Like Undercover Boss. This idea that when you're a leader, you get a little bit away from the day to day experience of a customer or your partners. And you have to put yourself back into that experience in order to see what it really is. And I think that that's something that we all have the capacity to do, and we could probably make the time to do. We just don't think to do it. And so that would be one piece of advice. Like if you're a leader, go back and experience your product or your service the way that someone who is buying it experiences it. Experience your relationship of working with your business the way one of your partners experiences it. And then see what maybe needs to be fixed.
So it's kind of like Elon Musk sleeping on the factory floor, setting an example, being one with
A
with your
little. I mean, if he spent all day working for not enough money, putting bolts on cars, that'd be a closer equivalent, I think.
yeah, but it puts you more in touch with what's really happening, so you can really make the best decisions as a leader. And that was something that was non-obvious.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because I think that we don't, it shifts your perspective, right? And that's one of the elements of, being a non-obvious thinker. You got to be able to shift your perspective.
Hmm. So you also have your own publishing company, Idea Press. Why have that kind of set up? Have this independent publishing company. Of course, you're writing all these different books, so it's helpful. But how beneficial has that been?
Oh, it's been huge. I would say I started Idea Press with my wife almost 10 years ago. And it was because of frustration I had working with traditional publishers to launch my books, where I just didn't have the control that I wanted. I felt, honestly, I mean, once you take an advance and you go through traditional publishing, the relationship basically is one of employer to employee. Like you're the author, but you're the employee. Like you're doing what you're told, kind of. And I didn't like that as an entrepreneur. I wanted to control my own business. I wanted to control everything about this process, but I didn't want to give up the elements of what you might consider real publishing. So I didn't want to give up the idea of having the books in stores or airports. I didn't want to have bad print quality. I wanted to have a beautiful book. That was really important to me. So I created Idea Press to be able to print beautiful books, put them into full distribution, have full retail distribution, not compromise on any of those things, and keep all the rights myself as an author. And once I did that and it became successful and I hit some bestseller lists, then I had all these friends and connections and colleagues who were also publishing books, who were also unhappy with the lack of control, that said, can you do our book for us too? And that's what started the business. And so now we've done nearly 100 books
Wow.
with various authors, and we take on new authors all the time.
Mhm. And what does it take to really scale a book to retail? Like, what are kind of some of the metrics you really need to hit earlier on, like to achieve the kind of scale that you want?
There's a few. I mean, you definitely want to have your own audience that you can activate. So I have a really popular email newsletter that people read every Thursday. And so I have a built-in audience that I can go to. That's important, whether it's on newsletter in my case or social media in some people's cases. You want to have an actual distribution partner that sells the book into retail. So we're fully distributed by a group called Two Rivers, which is part of Ingram. So when I say distribution, for us at least as a publisher, that doesn't mean somebody presses a button and puts the book into some digital catalog and then it just sits there if somebody wants to order it, which is what some people do for distribution. We actually have a team of salespeople who are going and selling titles every season to retailers to get distribution. So that is also important when it comes to getting distribution. And then buzz, I mean, momentum, right? Like getting in the media, seeing people talking about the book, having great word of mouth, having great reviews. All of those things make a difference.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's a whole process to really get to the point of where you can get the scale.
Oh, it's it's a process would be an understatement. Launching a book is an all encompassing thing.
So if you had to just break down, two or three of the goals that you have, or just overall, what's your goal with this new book? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want people to take away from it?
I want more people to feel like they are creative in their roles and in their lives. I want people to feel more open-minded. I want more non-obvious thinkers to exist in the world because I think non-obvious thinkers are the ones who come up with solutions to some of the big problems in the world that we need. And I would like for people to pick up this book who don't normally read business books because the format of it, aside from having really short chapters, I mean, it's illustrated, it's very easy to browse. We really tried to put it together in such a way that that people who don't normally read business books could digest and read this.
Yeah, that's great because then it's so accessible to people.
Yeah, that was the goal. I mean, I really look. It's my 10th book, so I know sort of a little bit about how people read, how they consume content, and it was important to me that this one be as approachable as possible. And the early feedback is definitely that it has been.
That's good. So just the last question that I have, what would you say is like your big picture vision, your overall like short-term, long-term goals over the next 5 to 10 years for Idea Press, for the books you're doing for Non Obvious? Where do you kind of see your big picture vision at?
That's a big question. I mean, I have this interesting entrepreneurs sort of battle between two companies, right? Because I'm a founder of two companies. And so one is growing the non-obvious platform, the books, the keynote speaking, and sort of the trainings that we do around that. Like we have some online courses and things. And the other is a full service publishing company where it's just we take on great authors and we do an excellent job for them so that they would want to work with us twice. And we get their books out there. And so I think that for Idea Press, I just want to keep doing what we're doing. And we've been very intentional about the books we take on. We don't take on very many books. We're very selective. But we've been really successful. And the authors that we've been working with are phenomenal. I mean, they're really world changing in their own right. And that's really super fulfilling for me to be behind the scenes helping them to succeed, right? We're not the sort of publisher. There are publishers like this out there, but we're not the publisher that puts our logo on the cover of someone else's book. Like that's not our, that's not the way that we think. The book is about the author. So that's been really fulfilling. And then for Non Obvious, I would love for that to just become a word and philosophy and mindset that is out there that people know. That people teach to their teams. I want that to go as wide as it possibly can because I feel like companies and people's careers are better if they can adopt this type of thinking.
Definitely agree. Well, I appreciate you coming on, taking the time to do this. I think it's really important that people have this ability to spot the non-obvious things. There's so many creative ideas that are completely outside the box that you wouldn't expect, and that you're trying to teach this, methodology and these systems is so important to having more of that, and that will only make the world a better place. So I look forward to your book, fully coming out, and people should definitely check it out. And thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.